You surface from the underground at Piccadilly Circus.
Mind the gap.
Making your way through the glittering lights of London's West End, you take a turn down a quaint-looking street into the notorious neighborhood of Soho. The lights are up, the crowd is buzzing, and you just stepped into the best seat in the house. Welcome to The Big Smoke, a variety show podcast. I'm Kevin Bennett, and I'll be your guide through this experience of comedy, conversation, and community. This week, we're rolling the dice under the harvest moon, sailing strange seas with quacky shipmates, and curling up with stories that feel like home. First, I sit down with author Caroline Taggart to explore the timeless and ever-evolving pastime of board games. We find out why flipping a table over Monopoly isn't just family drama, it's anthropology. Then, on our Parish Notice Board, we pull down a flyer for the Royal Observatory Greenwich to contemplate how the mystery of the stars and moon have helped us find our way this harvest season. After that, we venture out to the briny deep with our resident GP, Doctor Quack. He's on a globe-trotting voyage to collect medical breakthroughs that might just make you grateful for modern healthcare. And finally, feeling a tug of nostalgia after all that dice rolling and moon gazing, Archie's Neuro Nuggets returns to reveal why rewatching your favorite sitcoms isn't procrastination at all. It's a spa day for your neurons. But first, let's pop into the local for a quick pub quiz. This round, board games trivia. First up, Monopoly. In Monopoly, if you land directly on free parking, what happens according to the official rules? Next, Scrabble. In Scrabble, what's the official bonus for using all 7 of your tiles in a single turn, often called a bingo? And finally, chess. Which chess piece can legally make the very first move of a game? Think you know the answers? Share this episode with a friend and see how many you can solve. All will be revealed at the end of the episode. It's time to welcome our first guest. Please say hello to the author of The Philosophy of Board Games, Caroline Taggart. Hello, Caroline Taggart. Welcome to The Big Smoke.
Thank you for having me. Hello to you.
Thank you so much for being here on this beautifully drizzly day. I don't know. How would you term today's weather in London?
I would say it was pretty drizzly.
Pretty drizzly. Maybe yeah. Blustery is a better thing to say it. A nice blustery day. So we're here to talk about your book that's coming out later on in the autumn called The Philosophy of Board Games. And you're not a novice to the Philosophy of series. This is a series that the British Library puts out with varying topics, whether it's the philosophy of cheese or the philosophy of pickles. And you wrote one earlier, which was the philosophy of Christmas.
That's right. That came out this time last year.
And where did this philosophy of series come from? You were telling me earlier.
Well, somewhere in the British Library archives, there is a Victorian-era book called The Philosophy of Moustaches, which I have to confess I haven't read, but I assume that it was more or less serious.
Yeah.
And there were different styles of moustaches that were, what the well-dressed man is wearing, or what it said about you.
I need to read that, but I'm sure we can't get in contact with the author of The Philosophy of Mustaches, but I'm very curious about that. Seems to be, this is off topic, but I was thinking this summer, the full-on just mustache with no beard seems to be coming back amongst the youth I've seen. But I'm not sure if I like it very much, but that's a whole other thing. So the philosophy of board games, what made you want to dive into this topic?
Well, to be honest, it was a purely commercial decision between me and the publishers. They asked me last year to do this book of The Philosophy of Christmas, and it became apparent that it had to be illustrated in colour. All the earlier ones in the series were illustrated in black and white.
Okay, interesting.
And they did a gorgeous job. It's physically a very beautiful book with lots of great illustrations from their archive. And so, as publishers do, they said, okay, well, that worked. What do we do next? So the board games book is also in colour. And also, I can say this because I had nothing to do with the images, also going to look gorgeous.
I mean, I've seen a preview copy, but I also have seen and read The Philosophy of Christmas, and it is absolutely beautiful, really lovely. I think, like, I know the Philosophy of Christmas is obvious to say stocking stuffer, but it's that perfect little size because it's not quite as huge as a coffee table book, but it has that vibe of really beautiful images and really interesting information.
It's a small format. It's a nicely produced hardback. It is absolutely a stocking filler Christmas gift type thing.
And board games being the next subject. So I thought I would start by asking you, what is your favorite board game?
That's a tricky one because we played games a lot when I was a kid, and I'm of the generation that played Monopoly and Cluedo and things like that. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about this is that, like anything else that's in and out of fashion, things come and go. When I was a child, there was a game called Totopoly, which was made by the people who made Monopoly, and it was about racehorses. So you spent half the game choosing and training your race horses, and then you flipped the board over and you actually had the race. And
so there was different boards on each side, like a different...
Yeah.
Okay.
Fold over board or flip over board.
Yeah.
And when I was researching this book, I came across the Oxford Dictionary of Board Games, which is 400 pages long. It's an encyclopedia of board games. And it says, in passing, I think in the introduction, that Totopoly was a long-standing British favourite. And then nowhere else in the book does it get a mention. So it's just gone. And it was a game we loved. My brother and my sister and I, we played this all the time. At least that's my recollection.
Yeah. And it's not popular here now?
Apparently
in the
not.
UK? Apparently not, no.
And later on in my life, when I was a young adult, I played a lot of board games with a gang of friends who were particularly keen at the time. And there was a game called Hare and Tortoise. Now, Hare and Tortoise is interesting for a number of reasons. It was the first ever to win the German Game of the Year prize. And they make a lot of board games in Germany. It's a big thing. And the German award is the Oscars or the Booker Prize or whatever. It's the big one.
Yeah.
But this is a game made by a Brit, published in Britain, that was taken up in Germany. And it was innovative in that although it was a race, it didn't have a dice. So it reduces the element of luck enormously. And you have energy, if you like. You have carrots and you have lettuces, which are the things that enable you to make your way around the racetrack. And you decide how to use things rather than throwing a dice. And it was marvellous. Loved it. Well,
this is one of the things I found interesting when reading the book, which was I had never thought that deeply about board games, and I played lots of board games growing up as well, and on special occasions still do. And I love, and we'll go into this a little bit more later, but I love the categorization of the different types of games that you outline, as well as the appeal to some people of games that might have to do with chance, the roll of the dice, games that don't have the dice and are more strategy or more, the more you know your partner or the other people you're playing with, the more you can manipulate them in a way. And so I guess what's really interesting is board games appeal to any kind of sensibility. Was there anything specifically about how do you say it again?
Totopoly.
Totopoly. Say that 5 times fast. Totopoly. Do you think it was just... It was a new game. It was popular because horse racing was popular at that time. Like, what do you think made it popular?
Was it popular because we happened to possess it?
Yeah.
Did my grandmother give it to us for Christmas, and so we obediently played it? Half a century on, I have no idea.
Well, because I was thinking, I remember you mentioned, I think in the book at one point, the game Labyrinth, and we had a copy of that, and I loved that game. But there's no connection. I can't think of a connection of, what are the roots of Labyrinth? Is it I can't remember, is that based on something? Is it like
Not that
meant
I know
to
of.
Be Egyptian?
Well, only in the most superficial way.
It's
more like pirate treasure, really.
Right, okay.
But it's got this wonderful device whereby you can push some of the board around and change the way you race. So you can you can do things that benefit you and make a mess of it for somebody else at the same time. Which, if you've got my sort of mindset, that's win-win.
Yeah,
not just
around.
Me winning, but you losing. That's the best way.
Oh my gosh, that was a big part of my summer holidays with my niece and nephew. So actually I was going to mention, because one of my favorite games, and I'm curious if you've played this game, is a newer game But I say new, it's at least 25 years old, called Cranium.
Do you know, you mentioned that to me the other day and I looked it up and I thought, I've not come across this game at all.
Maybe this is a Canadian.
Shame on me, because it's very successful. And I just I don't think I've ever played it.
The beginning, one of the reasons I love it is, so it for at least 20 years has been a thing with my family when we gather at Christmas. And when I say my family, I mean from the grandparents to the aunts and uncles to the cousins. So there's, 25, 30 people in this little house. And for a long time, it kind of stopped during COVID and everybody's getting, older now and it's just becoming too big. But we would rent a house on the side of a mountain on Vancouver Island. It's absolutely beautiful. And one night we would play this epic game of Cranium. And one of the things I love about Cranium is that somehow they found a way to kind of fuse every type of game into one game. So because my family is so wild and loud, but also quite varied in terms of their personality types and who likes what. So there might be somebody who's really loves the history or word games, for example. Well, that's one of the sections. But then there's a section that's essentially like Pictionary, and then there's one that's essentially like charades. So you're kind of going around the board, and depending on where you land, you're doing one of these quite varied things. So in terms of board games, if you want to play something with like 25 people, which is, I can imagine, chaos.
And 25 people of 3 or 4 generations of ages.
Exactly. From, late 80s down to 8 years old, that game works well. And it is, it's always chaos, and I'm always tasked with the hosting it essentially and keeping it going, which can be stressful at times because then there's people shouting over about things that are right and wrong. But that's a memory that I have with board games. It's very, very specific.
But it's interesting what you say about combining all the elements, because I think in recent years, when there's been this massive upsurgence in interest in board games, they were really naff for the longest time. And now suddenly it's not nerdy at all. And people aren't necessarily passionate about chess, for example, which was the obvious example. They're passionate about games of all kinds. And so inventors of games, designers of games, are coming up with things that combine various elements. So you've got a mystery game coupled with a role-playing game, coupled with a collaboration game. And that's another concept that was new to me, post my childhood playing. The idea that you're not against everybody else. You're working on the same team to, as it were, defeat the game.
Is there anything, I was just thinking when you're talking about, people creating new games and there's sort of reinventing other ones or changing different things. In your research of games for this book, did you come across any kind of, let's say I wanted to make a new game. Would you give me any advice in terms of what makes a successful game? Or is it like writing a book where writing a novel and you go, you never know, it might be a great novel, but it's not going to be Harry Potter necessarily. Like, is it more that?
That's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because you have games like Trivial Pursuit, which obviously just hit the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Canadian, by the way.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Everybody played Trivial Pursuit. And you were allowed to play games after dinner as long as it was Trivial Pursuit. Nobody would dream of playing anything else.
Interesting.
In the 1980s, part of the competitive zeitgeist of Thatcher's Britain. Only, of course, it's a Canadian game. And then you have another thing that became very big for a while was Settlers of Catan.
Yes.
Which I think people now just call Catan. That was a collaborative game where you could help out other people. And it was invented by a German in the aftermath of Germany, East Germany and West Germany being reunited. It was at the end of the Cold War. It was a more peaceful game. It wasn't about world domination. It was about let's everybody get the best out of it.
And you mentioned before, board games are now, they were naff before. Now there's a whole resurgence, popularity. In the book, you talk about some board game cafes and bars and things in different places. That is a really popular thing to do. Why do you think that is? Why has that become suddenly that is now a popular thing that people love to do?
Well, I'd love to say that the answer was COVID, but it's longer ago than that. So I think COVID's part of it. And I think board games have always had the attraction. If you're playing in the family or among friends, that's different. But as a social thing, you can go out and meet strangers. And if you don't want to talk, if you're a bit shy, you don't know them terribly well, you just talk a bit and you play the game. And then if you happen to get to know the people and like them, so much the better. But you've still got the game. But why that should be happening now, or sort of 10 or 15 years ago when these board games cafes first started up, I can't tell you.
I mean, I wonder, it's sort of an obvious musing guess as well, if it's the, you know, as technology became more advanced and people got more into their phones and more isolated, because we're talking from the 2000s onward, or 2010, or whenever these board game cafes started to become, you know, more popular.
Yeah, about then.
Maybe there's something about that. But my other question I wondered, and I don't know if it's an interesting question or a boring question, but I thought, what's the appeal in your mind of the board compared to, you know, there's card games, there's, I do a feature on the podcast called Victorian Parlour Games, where we just feature a different parlour game, and usually they're not board games, they're games that, you know, we could play right now without anything. Is there a particular appeal you found in the board of the board games?
I think it's quite interesting that of recent years, and let's say, you know, in the last 20, physical games have become very beautiful. There's a lot of artwork goes into them. There's a gorgeous game that I discovered when I was first researching this book called Forgotten Island, one of the two. And it's got a gorgeous board with illustrations of individual tiles with temples and sunsets and things. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. But the concept of the game involves places getting flooded. And if a place is flooded, you flip the tile over and you've got the same image in monochrome. But it's still beautiful. And I think it's like the book world in the era of the e-book. There are a lot of people who like the physicality. They just like the thing. They like the object.
Yeah.
And books have certainly become much more beautiful. You know, there are many, many more beautifully produced books than there were 30 years ago. And I think the same is true with games.
It's funny because I'm the type of person who loves the smell of the book, the turning of the page, seeing how many pages, to the point where, you know, when I just came back from being home being in Canada for a long time over the summer. And it would be so much more convenient for my travels if I had a Kindle or one of those online books, because I never know what I want to read. So I bring a stack of about 10 books weighing down my suitcase, but at least I have options. And usually I look at one, maybe two of them throughout the whole holiday. But there it is.
Well, I think that is the mindset that likes physical board games.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that a board game gives you everything you need. You've got the board, you've got the dice, you've got the tokens, you've got the cards, you've got the rules. Whereas if you're playing a sort of Victorian parlour game, there might be, or the sort of games that you're describing with your massive extended family, there might be lots of give and take and leeway, and you know, you've got a piano, somebody plays the piano, so you have a sing-song involved, something of that sort. And if you've got the mindset that likes it to be just so and follow the rules, then it's ideal.
So another thing I was delighted by when I read the book is there are droplets of games that I'm sure anybody who reads the book is going to, I mean, unless they wrote that Oxford Dictionary of games, but even then maybe, will have not discovered. So I love, for example, I mentioned to you the other day, the Canadian game Sockeye. Tell me just the basis of how that one is played and kind of what the premise is of that game.
Well, there are only so many games. There are, you know, the Board Games Geek website has 93,000 games on it. But actually,
oh my God,
there's 6. Or, you know, a random number that is rather fewer than 93,000.
Okay.
There are basic concepts. And one of the most basic concepts is snakes and ladders.
Okay.
You throw a dice, you go along a course, you get to the bottom of a ladder, and for some reason you go up it, you get to the top of a snake, and for some reason you go down. That's exactly what Sockeye is. Now, this was shown to me by a nephew who lives in British Columbia and who works with the First Nations people in Canada. And I think it was produced by a First Nations community. I don't even know if it's commercially available. But it is precisely that. You throw the dice, you get further on because the salmon gets eaten. No, you get further back because the salmon gets eaten by an otter. A salmon goes up a ladder and can skip 5 places. Exactly the same concept. But you've got the basic educational thing that you're learning a bit about the salmon.
Well, exactly.
Which, of course, in First Nations British Columbia is fundamental.
And salmon is a huge part of, I grew up in British Columbia, and that was one of our main meals, is having a beautiful sockeye salmon. And so you talked about, actually, I think that's really interesting. You said there's, 93,000 on this website, but then there's only 6 or 10 or whatever, name the number of a specific, I guess, types of games. It makes me think of when I study story basis. And, there's people out there who say there's only 7 types of stories or 6 types or whatever it is. And you see these kind of archetypes. And I guess what you do with games and what you would do with stories is you dress it up in different ways to appeal to different people. And as you say, you learn you learn about the sockeye in the sockeye salmon game. Let's go through some of the other, I guess, archetypes of games. So Snakes and Ladders is one of them.
Well, yes, it's a race game with a morality element, if you like. So you're rewarded or punished. And Snakes and Ladders, as we know it, originated in India, and it was to do with karma and reincarnation and seeking nirvana, or whatever the Hindu equivalent would be. There was a early 19th century game in Britain called The Mansion of Happiness that was precisely that. It was rewarding virtue and punishing sloth and lechery and breaking the Sabbath and things like that.
So these are race games. So you're trying to get to the finish of the board, and depending on where you land based on the roll of the dice, you might get moved backwards, you might get moved forwards, you might get rewarded. Would you say, because in your chapter on the sort of moral games there's race games and then there's games based on morals, is Monopoly one of the moral ones?
Well, Monopoly started life as a moral one because it was invented by a woman who wanted to show the advantage of a particular economic theory that was fashionable at the time, that basically meant that nobody could make a lot of money out of earning a lot of property. As an economic policy, this did not take off.
No.
And somebody took hold of this game, a man called Darrow, round about the time of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and produced a variation, which, as we all know in Monopoly, the whole point is to make as much money as possible from owning as much property as possible.
The opposite
so
of
it's not moral at all. And what does this say about the human race?
Or a different kind of moral. The more you can amass, the more,
What does it say about the human race that this has sold hundreds of millions of copies in 46 countries?
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned it's the best-selling board game of all time.
And there are so
many, is that?
So many variations. You probably grew up playing either the London-based one or the Atlantic City-based one.
I think it was Atlantic City because we had Park Place and
that would be
like
Atlantic City.
Yeah.
And Boardwalk, I think, was the equivalent of Mayfair, the most
we had Boardwalk,
expensive one. But I looked it up when I was researching the book. If you're in the UK, you can have one based in Cardiff, you can have one based in Coventry.
Oh, really?
There's one in Amsterdam. There's several in different parts of the States. You can have one based around Harley Davidson's, the motorbikes. How does that work? No idea. And everybody hates this game. This is the thing.
This is so true.
In the dog days between Christmas and New Year, which I happen to love, but so many people hate, when people are stuck with their family and they're hungover and they're bored and it's raining and they play Monopoly, and it just brings out everything that everybody hates.
Yes.
And yet here we are talking about it.
I don't know about you, but I dread Monopoly because it's so long as well. It's to me, it feels like one of the longer games. I remember enjoying playing it when I was younger, but it's one of those games that people dread.
Yeah. And it was initially turned down by board games publishers because it was too long and it was too complicated. And to my mind, the other disadvantage of it is that it becomes clear very early on who's going to win.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a war of attrition. It's not, I've got a fighting chance, but it's, how long is it going to take you to beat me? When can I go bankrupt and go to the pub?
I just keep thinking there's definitely a metaphor for our, I guess, deep desires and also the way, the way human beings are, as you say, in terms of what I think about the metaphor of games kind of representing life. And actually, this is an interesting thing I want to go back to, which is we sort of started in the middle of the book. But in the beginning, one of your chapters is on early games, which I found really, really interesting because you mention a few different instances. But specifically, do you mind sharing with us? I can't remember which if it's a pharaoh or who it is, but someone is buried with a game.
Yep.
And the reason why
was one of them.
Okay. And why we think they were buried with that game.
There's a sort of association with fortune telling, but also life skills and strategy. Now, we know that the pharaohs were buried with food and goblets and servants and everything that they might need in the afterlife. But they also had games, and I'm pretty sure that it wasn't about playing games because they were going to be bored.
Yeah.
It was about strategy and overcoming the hurdles that they might have to overcome in the next world, which of course vary in detail from one tradition to another. But there was also, in ancient Greek times, somewhere sort of Iraq or thereabouts, they found lots of knuckle bones, which served basically as dice, with the names of gods on them. So you have Aphrodite on one, and that's to do with you're worried about your love life, you want help with some romance or other. Or you have Nike, the goddess of victory. Perhaps you're going into battle and you want her on your side. And these things have often been found near altars. So the suggestion is they're somehow or other in a sacred space.
And there is a weirdly, even now, I feel like there's a magical, I think of two examples of the sort of power of games growing up. So I remember watching the original Jumanji movie. I don't know if that's an actual game or if it's become a game since the film, but there's something of the power of the game because the game comes to life. And I remember it being, as a young person watching the film with Robin Williams, such a really, really engaging story of what the game teaches you and how the game is a metaphor for life. So there's a power in board games, whether thousands of years ago was maybe even more intense than it is now. But what is the oldest game that you've discovered that we still play today or that's still around?
Well, we still play drafts, checkers.
Okay. And how old
5,000 years?
Oh,
maybe?
wow. Okay. What's do we have like an earliest instance of where that was, or where that originated or where that's from?
I think it was in India. A lot of them were.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of why did it emerge here is to do with what civilization was happening. Because we know that they were playing chess in the Middle East in the 9th century or so, when the Islamic Empire was, pretty sophisticated and pretty widespread. And I don't know if you're familiar with the very cute little chessmen that were found on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland.
No.
They're in the British Museum, and they look like everybody's idea of a Viking. Every school child's idea of a Viking.
Is there a picture of this in the book?
There is.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And they're chess pieces dating from, I think, the 12th century. And they must have gone with Arab settlers moving up through Central Europe to what we now call Scandinavia, and from there coming down into Scotland when the Vikings invaded the British Isles. So they've gone all over the place, something like 1,200 years ago.
Well, you go from your first chapter on early games and you go into another early game, which is chess, but it has its own section, understandably. And obviously chess has been around for so many years, but it's not just a game that's been around that people still play. It's still hugely popular in the zeitgeist and in culture, and everything from what's that Netflix series, the Queen's Gambit,
yes,
to people playing massive tournaments and playing online and all, and you tell a few stories of people becoming completely obsessed with chess. What do you think it is about that game specifically that's so enduring and appealing?
I think probably it's because the possibilities are, as near as makes no difference, infinite. You set out a chessboard at the beginning in a certain way, and for your first move, you're allowed to move any one of 8 pawns, either one square or 2. So that's 16. You've also got 2 knights which can jump over the pawns, so you can move them as well, each of them in 2 ways. So you can start the game with any one of 20 moves. And mathematically, that means surely that anything you go from there, the options are enormous.
Yeah. And tell us about the influence of I love this bit of the book where you talk about Isabella of Castile and her influence on the game.
Well,
who was she, first of all?
Sorry. Ferdinand and Isabella were the king and queen of Aragon and Castile in Spain before Spain was united.
Okay.
And they're the ones who funded Columbus to go off in search of India.
Okay.
So
very influential.
1492, that was them. And there were a number of very powerful female monarchs scattered across Europe about then or within the next 100 years. Elizabeth I was one. Mary Queen of Scots was another. We know she played chess. She played all sorts of things. She was fantastic at embroidery. I think she played golf. She was an amazing woman.
Wow.
Catherine de' Medici, who was an Italian, married to the King of France. She had 3 sons who were all very short-lived and became King of France in quick succession. And she taught them all to play chess because it was a game of strategy and of social hierarchy as well. You know, the king and the queen are that much more powerful. The pawns are just the little guys, and the various other people, the knight and the bishop and the castle in between. But Isabella of Castile was the one who was credited with saying, hang on, there are queens too. It was only the king that was important before that. And she was influential enough to be able to say, let's just up the power of this piece. Let's have a queen too. And of course, the queen is now the most powerful piece on the chessboard. All that's happening to the king is he's sitting there and being protected.
I love this quote that you have. I think it's from a chess website in your book. The greatest victories in chess and life often come from the most unexpected places. And I think that is a bit of a nod to perhaps why so many people become obsessed with chess. You know, and also it's one of those games where it isn't the roll of the dice.
No, exactly.
It's strategy.
It's just up to you.
It's up to you. It's up to even reading your partner. We've spoken about moral and immoral games, Snakes and Ladders and Monopoly and race games. We move into mystery, collaborative, and role-playing games. Can you tell me just like what is the basis of you know, so we're talking about role-playing games here. What is an example of a role-playing game?
Well, the mother and father of role-playing games is Dungeons and Dragons, which isn't actually a board game, but there have been many spin-offs that are a board game. And in the original, you have somebody who's called the Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
And they make up a scenario, basically. If you buy it as a board game, the scenario is there for you. But what happens in these things is that everybody has different characteristics. So you might have somebody who's a scientist, you might have somebody who's a priest, you might have somebody who's a magician, whatever it may be. And so you have different superpowers, not necessarily super, but powers. So you might be particularly physically strong, you might be very bright, you might be particularly cunning, and you have to use these characteristics to get to the target, to achieve whatever you've been set out to do.
Now, I could be wrong. Is Clue or Cluedo one of these types of games, or is that in a different category?
That's in a different category. That's a mystery game. Mystery collaborative and role-playing was a sort of catch-all title for a chapter. But Cluedo, as we call it in this country, Clue as it's called in the States, and presumably in Canada as well.
Canada, it's Clue, as well.
Was one of the original murder mystery, probably the original murder mystery game in board games form, because, you know, the Brits in particular have always loved a murder mystery. You know, Agatha Christie remains, 50 years after her death, one of the best-selling novelists of all time. Earl Stanley Gardner, who wrote Perry Mason, was the most successful American novelist of his day. We're just fascinated by it. And so somebody came up with a game that was based around you solving a murder. And there have been many, many spin-offs, a lot of them much more complicated. There's a haunted house where you are, again, this is a collaborative game, but in a haunted house, so it overlaps the two categories, where the players are working as a team to solve the mystery. The house is haunted by the ghost of somebody who was hanged for a murder he didn't commit 100 years ago, and you plural, all the players, have to sort it out.
And I just want to go back to the role-playing as well, as that's under the umbrella of this mystery, collaborative, and role-playing games. What is an example? So Dungeons and Dragons, which isn't technically a board game, but has launched a lot of spin-offs. What's an example of a popular role-playing game? And give me an idea of the premise of how that works. Because I'm thinking, when I just think of it, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, so I don't know how it works. And I think there's, I think board games have a set of rules and you read the rule book. And I would imagine role-playing games maybe have a lot more unknown, a lot more, I don't know, different ways that it can go. I would imagine it'd be maybe harder to control.
I think it's actually harder to learn to do in the first place.
Yeah.
That's probably what would attract a lot of people and would also put a lot of people off. Particularly if you're playing it in the traditional way where somebody else is in charge and nobody, you're turning up at your board games cafe every Friday night for months playing the same game under somebody else's umbrella. And it appeals to some people. I have to say it doesn't appeal to me a very great deal.
Wasn't there sort of mafia, wink murder types of things? I don't know if those are board games, but...
There's no shortage of mafia-based games.
Yeah. Trying to figure out who the killer is and different people are assigned those roles.
And once you get into that sort of thing, of course, you have an enormous number of people who are basically bad guys.
Yeah.
It's based around making somebody an offer they can't refuse, or blackmail, or coercion, or something of that sort.
Now, of course, we would be, stabbed in the street, not to use a violent image, if we did not mention the next category, because people feel very strongly about Scrabble and other word games, which is one of the later chapters in the book. And I'm curious, you mentioned this gentleman called Alfred Butts, who I believe ruined many an evening by inventing Scrabble. And I've been parts of those evenings before. Why do you think, I guess, first of all, why do you think Scrabble is so popular? But then more importantly to me, why do you think it's so controversial?
Well, why is something so popular? It's a really, really difficult question to answer, isn't it? People like it. Simple as that.
Yeah.
But you've got to be very careful who you play Scrabble with. I think actually you should be careful who you play any game with.
Yes.
But Scrabble is probably the one where it really matters that you're all approaching it in the same spirit.
Yeah.
Because there is a thing called the official Scrabble words, which is like a dictionary without the definitions. It's got all the words that are permissible in Scrabble in it. And particularly the two-letter words, there's an awful lot of them that people say, that's not a word.
Yeah.
I mean,
do you have any
word,
examples of that?
Well, yeah, there's a word spelt literally A-A. I think in Hawaiian it has an apostrophe in the middle, but that's okay. We've disposed of that. And it's a sort of volcanic rock. It's a lava flow. There's a word ugh, which is an old word for inspiring loathing.
Just UG.
UG, and it's the word from which we get ugly.
Okay.
Now, we've got ugly, but we don't have ugh anymore, except it's in the Scrabble dictionary.
Yeah.
So it's in the Scrabble dictionary, therefore it's allowed. Yeah, but it's not a word. That's not fair.
So who determines this Scrabble dictionary? Is it Alfred Butts' descendants?
Them, the powers that be.
Alfred Butts' great-grandchildren.
The publisher, the compiler of this particular dictionary, I guess.
Interesting. It's funny because when I've played it at home with extended family, usually what we do is we have just whichever dictionary we have, like a physical dictionary. So if you want to contest a word, if it's in that particular dictionary, which I'm sure some of the Scrabble ones aren't, we use that. But you're so right in terms of different people and different strategies and things like that. You do mention, I won't make you recount it right now because it's probably hard to remember, but you do mention a couple of words that, like, if you started with that word, you'd get 100 and something points. It's absurd.
Yes. It was a joke from Mad Magazine. Somebody had said, my wife put out the word Xeroxed on a triple. And so I killed her. And I worked it out because,
oh my God.
Some people in the line of duty really will do strange things. So I worked out how much you would score if you did this.
Okay.
Now, in a basic English language Scrabble set, there's only one X. So you'd have to use a blank, which doesn't score anything, to make the second X. But if you put it down I think I got it along 2 triple word scores. Anyway, it made 119, which is a pretty good score.
That's a pretty damn good score.
Yeah. I mean, lots of people would think 119 wasn't bad to get in one game, never mind one turn.
Exactly, a full game.
So, yeah, that's the sort of thing that can be pretty bad on a date night, is my suggestion.
Yeah, to be careful of doing of pulling out Scrabble if you're too early on in your relationship. What's the most what would you say is the most surprising discovery you made when reading this, or the most interesting thing that you didn't realize about board games before you started researching the book?
Part of what we were talking about earlier, which is just how important they were, how significant they were, how obsessive people can be about them. I mean, I tell this lovely story apropos of chess, which is, one of the ultimate obsessive games, of the artist Marcel Duchamp, who was the most successful artist in France in his day, which is, 1920s or so. And he became obsessed with chess to the extent that he more or less gave up painting, and he became a national champion at chess. But he spent his honeymoon playing chess problems. And, chess enthusiasts work out chess problems on their own. You don't need another player.
Right. Practice, yeah.
So much so that his bride ended up gluing all the pieces to the chessboard so that she couldn't do it. The marriage didn't make it past Christmas. And I'm surprised it made it that long.
Good thing they didn't play Scrabble. Oh, my gosh. And I love that. And it makes me think of, at any game, especially a game that's cross generations. I was talking about family games and stuff. Something I find interesting is we talked about there's archetypes for games, but there's archetypes for people playing games, I feel. There's like the person who really knows the rules, and it really bothers them if any deviation from the rules. It's like they've got the rules in their head. And then there's the person who just wants to make everybody happy and is kind of trying to be in the middle of everything. And then there's the person who almost is trying to cheat a little bit or not, or prove that they don't take it that seriously. There's people who, might have a mini meltdown if they lose. There's people there's sore winners, sore losers, all these types of things. And I just think
You've been playing with my family, haven't you?
Well, I've just been playing with so many different generations and so many different, whether it be board games or parlor games or other things over the summer, that I think, it's really interesting. It's like the archetype of story, the archetype of game, the archetype of player of a game. And I think it just made me think of that because you were saying how important they are. Because I think one of the things that interests me so much in storytelling and art is, why do we as humans, we're pretty much the only animal that does these things. Now, of course, there are animals that play and do other types of things, but I think about, we play games, we watch stories, we do all this stuff that's like us, practicing or learning for real life, or trying to get better for when something happens in, quote, real life in the future. And I just find it absolutely fascinating. Well,
it's interesting that you should say that animals play, because, of course, a lot of animals, young animals, play to learn life skills.
Exactly.
They play fight, for example. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to what we were saying. It's about strategy. A war game, if you're a politician or a medieval politician who needs to know about war, learning the strategy in a safe environment on a board is like, a lion cub fighting with one of its litter mates.
And here is the board, a beautiful piece of art sometimes a very simple thing. And the board is like the metaphor. There's life, there's whatever the thing is. There's the Monopoly board has all the possibilities of the things you can acquire. It's absolutely fascinating. It's a beautiful book. And as you say, the images are beautiful, but the information written inside is fantastic. It comes out mid-October, but you can pre-order it now anywhere you can order books. And we will link this in the show notes. So if you're listening and interested, you can definitely find a link in the show notes to purchase the book. I highly recommend it. If you have a board game enthusiast, or even, a stocking stuffer, or it's a lovely book just to have around, especially thinking about family gatherings and people coming and, you're at your parents for Christmas, and it's a lovely thing to flip through because you can read one chapter and come back to it later on, or even flip through and look at the beautiful pictures as well. Wanted to ask you one more question, which is off the top of your head, if people are listening and they think, I got to pick up another board game and order it online or go to the store and buy it. Is there a particular game that you can think of? I was delighted to learn about Sockeye, but is there one that you didn't know about before you researched this that you might recommend people try that you enjoy?
I like the railway games.
The railway games, okay.
1829, Railway Rivals, that are, again, they're slightly educational. They're, where did the railway go? Or why did the railway go to this particular place? And again, they're about tactics and building up resources and getting to the other side, getting across the Oregon Trail to the West Coast and this sort of thing.
What are the names of them again?
1829, which is the time when the year that Stephenson's rocket sort of started the railway age in this country, and Railway Rivals.
Well, that first one, is it set in the UK in terms of where that might be a good one for me, actually, because I've lived in the UK for 7 years now, but I definitely, because I'm in London, so I don't explore the rest of the country as much as I like to. So maybe that would be a nice way for me to just learn a little bit about the railway and where it goes and how it's such a significant part of this country. So yeah, great suggestion. Thank you very much. Absolutely lovely to chat with you and meet you.
Great fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Go off and play games, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on The Big Smoke.
Thanks for having me.
Did you enjoy that conversation and fancy a copy of Caroline's fantastic book? Well, you're in luck. We've put together a quick 5-minute survey where you can tell us a little about yourself and what you think of the show. And when you fill out the survey, you will be entered to win a copy of The Philosophy of Board Games. You can find a link for the survey in the show notes. When the bells ring out across the Big Smoke, it's time to wander into our local village hall to discover what's pinned on the Parish Notice Board this week. Today, as our little blue planet continues its steady journey around the sun, you've probably started to feel a change. For those of us in the northern hemisphere, the air sharpens, the days shorten, and the shadows stretch. Umbrellas become everyday essentials, in the Big Smoke at least. It's a time of change, of preparing, a moment to gather what we've sown, not just in the fields, but in our lives. This is the season of the harvest. For centuries, this time of year has marked more than just the end of the growing season. It's a time to take stock and begin storing up what we need, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to sustain us through the darker months ahead. And at the center of this ancient rhythm glows the harvest moon. The harvest moon is the full moon closest to the September equinox, that perfect cosmic balance of day and night, just as the scales tip towards winter. It's one of the brightest and earliest rising moons of the year, casting golden light across fields just as the sun sets. Historically, this glow allowed farmers to work late into the evening, bringing in the final fruits of their summer labor. Across many cultures, the harvest moon marks a time of gratitude, ritual, and connection to the land. In India, full moon festivals like Sharad Purnima celebrate the end of the growing season with prayers and offerings, while indigenous North American tribes once named each full moon after seasonal changes, such as corn moon or barley moon. In West Africa, the Yam Festival honors the first harvest with dancing and ancestral rites. These global traditions all reflect a reverence for the natural cycles of abundance and scarcity, sentiments that come into full expression in China's Moon Festival, or Mid-Autumn Festival. Second only to Lunar New Year in scale, this festival is marked by gatherings, lanterns, and offerings to the moon. You may know of this celebration through its iconic delicacy, mooncakes. These palm-sized pastries with their golden crusts and rich egg yolk centers are exchanged as gifts and enjoyed with family. Their round shape echoes the full moon and symbolizes reunion, happiness, and good fortune. The mid-autumn sky also serves as a profound point of connection for families spread across the vast country. No matter the distance, families feel connected as they look up at the same moon. In this way, the harvest moon is more than just a seasonal marker. It's a reminder that we've always looked up with wonder at the same sky, letting the moon and stars guide our calendars and our journeys. And this year, that curiosity is being celebrated in a particularly special way. The Royal Observatory Greenwich, the historic home of British astronomy, is celebrating its 350th anniversary. Founded in 1675, the observatory has played a pivotal role in our understanding of time and space. For context, it's over a century older than the United States. Before it was founded, sailors had long looked to the stars, sun, and moon to guide their way. Its establishment didn't stop that. Instead, it refined it, turning centuries of celestial wisdom into something measurable. And it was a way of staying one step ahead of the French. Let's set the scene.
It's 1667, and Louis XIV has just opened Paris Observatory to help improve measurements of longitude, your east-west position at sea and on land. You can measure your latitude or north-south position relative to the equator using the sun and stars. But for longitude, it's much more tricky because there's no natural starting point. It could be anywhere on the planet. Scholars hoped that better star measurements would help with longitude, and so the astronomers in Paris started work. A few years later, a French astronomer came to the English court and claimed that they were making good progress in improving navigation, and this got King Charles II and his scientific experts from the Royal Society rather worried. This wasn't good news. Better navigation would give the French an advantage in terms of trade routes, profits, and political influence around the globe, and Charles wasn't going to be beaten by his French rival. So in March 1675, the king signed a royal warrant, appointing John Flamsteed, an astronomer from Derby, as the new astronomical observator, tasked with perfecting the art of navigation.
That voice you just heard is Dr. Louise Devoy, Senior Curator at the Royal Observatory Greenwich.
I'm essentially a history detective who tries to piece together the story of the Royal Observatory through its buildings, collections and archives to help us understand what it was like to live and work here over the past 3 centuries.
A history detective? What an enticing job description. So where were we? Yes, King Charles II, vexed by the French, appointed John Flamsteed to perfect celestial navigation.
One of the first things that Flamsteed had to do was to create Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT. If you measure time by the sun, you'll find that it varies. It's not always 24 hours from noon to noon. It can actually vary by about plus or minus 15 minutes. Now, for most people in the 1670s, this didn't matter. But for astronomy and navigation, this was too variable. So Flamsteed smoothed out the variations to create an average or mean day of exactly 24 hours that you could use all year round with a clock or a watch. He then started mapping the stars by aligning his instruments with the local meridian, an imaginary north-south line that extends from pole to pole. And this is a general principle that astronomers around the world still use today because it's a great way of aligning your telescope with the motion of the stars. Flamsteed worked hard for over 40 years, but sadly his work was only really useful to other astronomers. It didn't make any difference to navigation. The same happened to his successor, Edmund Halley, who you'll recognise as the name behind the comet. Then, in 1750, the third Astronomer Royal, James Bradley, set up another meridian just a few metres away with a more accurate instrument, and this really transformed navigation both at sea and on land. This became the meridian where astronomers collected data for the Nautical Almanac. This book was published by the observatory every year from 1667 onwards, and it gave mariners lots of astronomical information that helped them use the moon to calculate their longitude at sea relative to Greenwich.
This same moon that has held the secrets to intercontinental travel shines brighter and larger at this time of year, allowing its light not only to guide intrepid explorers, but also farmers gathering the last of their summer crops. The harvest moon is a time of change. Across the world, it marks a moment to reap what we've sown and enjoy the rewards of our hard work. So, what are you going to harvest this season? To learn more or plan your visit to the Royal Observatory, check out the links in the show notes. And if this story has sparked your curiosity, keep an eye out for Dr. Devoy's upcoming book, Royal Observatory Greenwich, A History in Objects, which promises to bring to life the history and wonder of the Royal Observatory like never before. Wandering through the streets of London, history peers at us from every corner. Yet few people realize how close they are to the weird, wonderful, and sometimes terrifying history of medicine. Whether it's sipping lattes in Camden next to the very spot where the Black Plague broke out, or sauntering out of Tottenham Court Road Station only to find yourself face to face with the site of St. Giles Hospital for lepers. Centuries of medical history surrounds us. So let's go for a checkup. A few years back in time, on the rough waters of the briny deep and visit with our resident GP, Dr. Quack.
We find Dr. Quack in the captain's quarters aboard the HMS Discovery at the end of a voyage around the world in the pursuit of greater medical understanding. All the medical procedures mentioned are real medical procedures used throughout history. Hello and good morning, Captain de Wolf. First of all, thank you for letting me in, finally. We're all starting to feel pretty worried about you. Anyway, I thought that as we were approaching the end of our journey, I'd like to say thank you for letting me aboard the good ship Discovery and leading the way on this world expedition for the advancement of medical science. The things I have learned from my fellow curers at the four corners of our flat planet will have benefits that will live on long after all of us have shuffled off this mortal coil. Which brings me neatly on to the death count of the crew. Luckily for me, due to certain conditions aboard, I've been able to test a number of our new treatments out on the sailors. As I say, lucky for me. Not quite so lucky for them. So, a quick roundup of our discoveries and some minor casualties. Well, some good news first on Quartermaster Warford. As you may have heard, he was suffering from a sore throat, which has been a real death sentence aboard this ship, so he was a little nervous. Having tried the almost foolproof method from our Welsh brethren of boiling up snails and drinking the syrup, a lot of the sailors were weirdly reporting no benefits at all and actually becoming more ill. And we've also run out of snails. So, I turned to a brilliant cure passed on to us by those scientific bear moths, the Greeks. Each day, I've walked Quartermaster Warford up onto the top deck to take in a lungful of sea air and then forced him to swallow a large amount of dried dog poo, donated to us by the ship's dog. And now Mr. Warford is in a stable, comatose state, and I'm blowing pipe smoke directly up his anus regularly, so I think that should put our minds at rest a bit. Actually, Dutch fumigation has proved to be quite popular with the sailors. Thank you, Holland. Every time I light up a pipe, I have a line of seamen queuing up. I think it gives them a real pep in their step. But it's not all been jolly sailors with pipe smoke up their anuses. I've actually had to deal with a rather personal matter brought to me by Bosun LeBlanc. Due to patient-doctor confidentiality, I can't give you all the details, but let's just say, and read between the lines here, he's impotent. I am telling you, I could see the shame in his eyes, and I knew that something had to be done. Luckily, having gathered fantastic insight when we stopped in the colonies of British America, I had no doubt in my mind what the simplest solution would be: replacing his human testicles with a goat's. So I got him on the kitchen cutting block and set to work on his scrotum. A bit of slicing, a touch of snipping, and a lot of sewing later, and Monsieur LeBlanc had a fantastic new pair of goat's testicles. Very sadly, of course, the ship's goat could not be saved, and a beautiful funeral was held, as well as some lovely mutton soup that night. Also, Bosun LeBlanc, of course, died, so we had to dump his body over the side of the boat. Oh, I'm sorry, Captain. That was insensitive of me. Ship. We dumped his body over the side of the ship. Oh, now, I know you would have heard about the outbreak of plague-like symptoms aboard, which would have been extremely concerning, but I wasted no time in treating this with the very height of our English medical knowledge, and I had every sailor, without delay, fart into a jar. If any of them felt like they were suffering from anything like the plague, they were to immediately open the jar and sniff the farts within. However, for some baffling reasons, which I cannot explain, sniffing farts stored in jars had almost no effect in curing the plague. Some sailors got desperate and started passing wind directly into each other's faces, which brought on a massive bout of pink eye, and that I treated by, and thank you to our North American medical men for this, scraping their eyelids with various herbs. All in all, 15 men dead. Now, one very interesting phenomenon has been the hay fever epidemic aboard. After our trip to Peru and the large amount of cocaine the doctors there provided us as a cure for hay fever, for some unbeknownst reason, everyone on board started to tell me they had developed quite acute hay fever and wanted extremely regular treatment. I've never seen a medical cure have quite such a fervent uptake. Of course, your own extremely rampant case of hay fever, Captain, meant that you decided to lock yourself in your cabin for the last 2 weeks with the entire supply of cocaine. and well, we've all been concerned because, well, you don't look like you've gotten any better. In fact, you look quite alarming. And as I say, I'm quite glad you let me in because we may need to offer up a bit of diplomacy because the crew have become extremely keen on the idea of mutiny. First of all, to get their hands on the rest of that hay fever cure, and then to sail the ship back to Peru and live there forever. Yes, it's been quite a task for myself and the lieutenants to keep them at bay. Luckily, as I say, the plague put an end to a lot of them, which certainly helped. But if I could share out a little of the cocaine... No. All right. Understood. Loud and clear. Please put the sword down, Captain. Right. Back to my report. Oh, a most wonderful story to finish off. Our dear old cook, Mr. McRobbie, has been suffering from rheumatoid arthritis for years, and that little crumpled man had almost no relief from it. How fortunate he was to be on this ship. How fortunate were we to sail to Australia and tap into their knowledge. Using the wisdom they provided, it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment. And last week, it happened. Late at night, we saw exactly what we were looking for floating off the port bow. With a bit of a struggle, we got it onto the deck and brought Mr. McRobbie to sea. Oh, you would have smiled to see his face. You couldn't believe it. Finally, after all these years, he would have some relief from his rheumatoid arthritis. Unfortunately, at the last minute, learning what we had in store for him, and being a simple-minded, superstitious man, he panicked and tried to flee from the cure. But luckily, because of his arthritis, he was too weak to prevent us from forcing his entire body into the carcass of a dead whale, and leaving him there for 30 hours. Now, you tell me medical science isn't a wonder. Cards on the table. It has been hard to tell how effective it's been as a cure for arthritis, largely due to the fact that Mr. McRobbie was found suffocated to death inside the whale carcass. And hands up, on looking back at my notes, I realise now that I was, of course, meant to leave his head poking out. But pretty incredible nonetheless. All in all, out of the 30 men aboard when we set off, we've only lost 23. One in a coma, and yourself pretty tied up with that hay fever medicine. So I'd say a success. I can't wait to share my findings with the Royal Medical Society. I couldn't have a bit of that hay fever medicine, could I?
And that was our appointment with Dr. Quack. Ah, there goes the yoga bell, making me feel zen already. It's time for Archie's Neuro Nuggets, quick actionable insights from the emerging field of neuroaesthetics.
Hello Big Smoke community, my name is Archie McAlpine. I'm an interdisciplinary specialist in the wellbeing space. I'm an entrepreneur and researcher specialising in wellbeing and the field of neuroaesthetics, which is the newest branch of neuroscience which explores how our brain responds to the arts and to our environment. I've just curled up in my cosy apartment in southeast London after a long day of dodging deadlines, packed tubes, and overpriced oat lattes. There's nothing quite like this. The kettle's on, I'm all cozied up on the sofa, pyjamas on, remote in hand. I scroll past 10 new releases, 3 Oscar-nominated dramas I said I'd watch, and land, without hesitation, onto Gilmore Girls. Or maybe Will and Grace. Maybe Friends. Again. Some of you are already nodding along. Others might be thinking, why watch something again when you already know what's happened? But if you've ever rewatched a show so many times that you can quote entire scenes word for word, you're not alone. And it turns out there's a science behind why it feels so good. So what's actually happening here? Rewatching old favourites acts like emotional comfort food. It's safe, familiar and predictable, something our brains crave, especially when the world outside feels anything but. Our brains are essentially prediction machines, and in a modern world where we're constantly being bombarded by notifications and urban noise, it's no surprise that switching to something predictable can help our brains to take a break. There's no new plot to follow, no mental gymnastics trying to figure out who's the killer or what's just happened. Cognitively speaking, it's low effort, and that's the point. It frees up headspace for you to unwind, rest, even doze off, knowing exactly what comes next. According to research from Fielding Graduate University in California, rewatching stories gives us a sense of mastery and emotional regulation. It creates a loop of control, safety, and pleasure. Our brains love a good loop. This brings us on to the topic of nostalgia. Nostalgia isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling, but an emotional superpower. Studies have shown that nostalgic experiences increase happiness and self-esteem, boost life meaning and emotional resilience, and even help us feel more socially connected. So when we rewatch that show we loved in our teens, we're not actually killing time at all, but we're reconnecting with a version of ourselves that felt carefree, understood, maybe even at home. It's an act of self-preservation, dressed up as a Netflix binge. So what's happening in the brain? When we revisit these familiar narratives, something beautiful happens upstairs. The medial prefrontal cortex lights up. This is the part of the brain linked to emotional processing, self-reflection, and social connection. We activate reward systems, dopamine hits, which is linked to pleasure and familiarity, and we reinforce neural patterns linked to identity, memory, and safety. And if the show has strong storytelling, it's even better. Stories activate the default mode network, which helps us imagine, empathize, and connect emotionally. Narratives are how we make sense of the world and of ourselves. That's why we return to the same characters, the same story arcs, the same jokes. They reflect something in us, something consistent and familiar. And when the rest of life feels like chaos, pressing play on that one scene you love is like telling your nervous system, you're safe, you've been here before, you're okay. Of course, comfort can sometimes become avoidance. If rewatching replaces connection, rest, or new experiences, or if you find yourself rewatching the same show just to escape your emotions, not process them, then that could be a red flag. But in moderation, it's medicine, backed by memory, wrapped in theme tunes and laugh tracks. So next time you're feeling overwhelmed, skip the pressure to catch up on that new content. Instead, revisit an episode that made you laugh, or one that reminds you of a specific time in your life. Notice what shifts, your body, your breath, your mood. See if you feel a little more you afterwards. Right, time to get back to my show. I think I'm going to watch an episode of Friends. I think the one where Phoebe Runnel's funny.
Thanks for that, Archie. I guess I won't feel so guilty about watching Frasier again tonight. You can find more info about Archie and his work at archiemcalpineassociates.com. Or you can click the link in the show notes. Are you enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going? Join our Patreon and get your backstage pass for as little as £5 per month. Get yourself a peek behind the curtain. Enjoy perks like our monthly newsletter, special episode shoutouts, a community chat, and first dibs on live show tickets. But most importantly, you'll be helping us keep the footlights on and bring more people into our little parish here. Support us today at patreon.com/The Big Smoke Variety Show. It's time to play Victorian parlor games. All games, from the Roman gladiatorial battles to a quiet round of cards or charades, are imitations of real-life situations. The activity of playing games is the expression of an instinct, for play is far older than culture, older even than prehistory. So here's our offering to you, a way to connect with your friends and family and have a bit of fun. Today's game is a Victorian parlor board game. It's Checkers Go Bang! Checkers Go Bang is inspired by the ancient Chinese game Go Bang, but this version is played on a standard checkers board with regular pieces. Here's how it works. 2 players take turns placing 1 piece at a time on any vacant square. If during this setup phase someone lines up 5 pieces in a row, vertically, horizontally, or diagonally, they win instantly, though that's rare. If neither player manages that, then once the board is full, you start moving. On your turn, slide one of your pieces to any adjoining square, aiming to create a line of 5. The first player to do it calls out, "Go Bang!" and claims victory. It's now time to reveal who will claim victory as the tabletop titan with the answers to our pub quiz board games trivia. First, I asked, in Monopoly, if you land directly on free parking, what happens according to the official rules? The answer? Absolutely nothing! No jackpot, no bonus, despite the piles of cash your uncle always stuffed there. That whole free parking payday is a house rule, invented by players in the 1950s to speed up games and make them more dramatic. Next, I asked, in Scrabble, what's the official bonus for using all 7 of your tiles in a single turn, often called a bingo? The answer? A 50-point bonus. When Scrabble mania exploded in 1952, Macy's department store sold out so completely that its president couldn't even buy a set for his own family Christmas. A story that made headlines and sent sales through the roof. And finally, I asked, which chess piece can legally make the very first move of a game? The answer? A white pawn or either white knight. Knights are special because they can leap over other pieces right from the start. According to Caroline Taggart's The Philosophy of Board Games, chess can be traced back to 6th century India, where its ancestor, Chaturanga, was played long before it reached Persia and then Europe, making it one of the oldest continually played strategy games on Earth. Well, how'd you do? If you nailed all 3, you're officially banned from family game night for excessive smugness. For everyone else, don't flip the board. There's always next week in the Big Smoke. Well, that's today's episode. We hope you enjoyed listening. Where else can you hear about Scrabble-induced family feuds, the creation of Greenwich Mean Time, questionable cures from the 7 Seas, and the science behind your Gilmore Girls binge? All in one episode! If you liked what you heard, share it with a friend, or drop us a quick review. Or even better, become a Patreon. It keeps this parish buzzing and helps us welcome more curious souls. Until next time, friends, we'll see you soon in the Big Smoke.